There's a cartoon that for nearly 20 years has put on screen every contradiction, absurdity, and hypocrisy of the American dream. And it did so while people were too busy laughing to notice the depth of what they were actually watching. This show isn't the most famous one on Fox, it's not the one everyone brings up when talking about smart adult animation, but it might be by far the most honest about what the United States really is. We're talking about American Dad, patriotism. And if you still think it's just another family comedy about a CIA agent with an alien living in his house, you haven't been paying close enough attention. Stan Smith isn't just a funny character, he's such a precise caricature of the average American conservative that it becomes genuinely uncomfortable. Extremely patriotic, obsessed with guns, suspicious of anything that isn't American, religious when it's convenient, authoritarian at home, and completely blind to his own contradictions. Stan genuinely believes he's on the right side of history, that he protects his family, that he serves his country. And it's exactly that unshakable conviction that the show uses to tear him apart episode after episode in a way that makes you laugh while thinking, wait, this guy actually exists. The show premiered in 2005, just a few years after 9/11, at a moment when the United States was still riding a wave of anxious patriotism, questionable wars in the Middle East, and an increasingly polarized political culture. Seth MacFarlane and the show's creators decided to take that environment and put it inside an American suburban home. The result was Stan Smith, the post-9/11 American personified, someone who confuses fear with patriotism, obedience with virtue, and prejudice with protection. What makes American Dad different from many other satires is that it doesn't point fingers from a distance. The show lives inside the contradiction. Stan loves the family he constantly oppresses. He defends values he himself violates. He serves an institution in the CIA that operates in a completely gray moral zone, and he does it with unwavering pride. When Stan does something wrong, he rarely learns. And when he does learn, he frequently forgets by the next episode. That's not narrative laziness, it's a statement. Because that's exactly how the cycle of self-deception works inside an ideology that refuses to evolve. But the show wouldn't be nearly as good if it relied only on Stan. That's where the other characters come in as pieces of a much more sophisticated machine than it first appears. Roger, the alien hiding in the attic, is perhaps the most fascinating character in modern American television. He's completely immoral, selfish, manipulative, capable of destroying other people's lives out of sheer boredom, and at the same time he's hilarious and magnetic. Roger isn't a critique of any specific political group, he's a critique of American individualism in its purest, most uncontrolled form. He's the me-first mentality taken to a cosmic extreme. He lies, he role-plays, he builds fake identities, he hoards resources, he humiliates others, and he never faces real consequences. If you close your eyes and try to picture capitalism as a person, Roger is probably what shows up. Haley, the older daughter, is the direct ideological counterpoint to Stan. She's progressive, activist, critical of the system, and then the show is smart enough not to turn her into a hero. Haley is frequently hypocritical in her own way. She defends causes with passion but abandons her principles when it's inconvenient. She has high ideals that keep crashing into the petty reality of everyday life. The conflict between Haley and Stan isn't just a father and daughter arguing, it's the American political divide played out around a dinner table. And the show is honest enough to show that neither of them is completely right. Steve, the teenage son, represents something different and equally real. The anxiety of growing up in a society that pressures you to be several things at once. He wants to be accepted, he wants to be masculine in the way his father defines masculinity, but he's also sensitive, creative, insecure, and completely lost inside the social expectations placed on him. Steve is the direct product of a conservative household trying to adapt to a world that changed faster than Stan can accept. He's the generation that inherits their parents' contradictions without ever having asked for them, and then there are Klaus and Jeff. Klaus, the German fish with the brain of a Nazi skier, exists as a permanent reminder that the Smith family welcomes the absurd without questioning it, as long as it doesn't disturb the established order. Jeff, the hippie son-in-law Stan never accepted, is the antithesis of everything Stan represents and, paradoxically, one of the most genuinely good characters in the entire show. The series uses Jeff to demonstrate that the people Stan most despises often have more humanity than he does. One of the most underrated aspects of American Dad is how it transforms heavy subjects into entertainment without gutting the critique. There are episodes about CIA torture presented as screwball comedy, episodes about gun obsession that end in absurd tragedy, episodes about xenophobia disguised as family adventure. The show does something very difficult. It uses humor as a Trojan horse. You come in laughing and walk out with a discomfort you can't quite name right away. Compare it to Family Guy and the difference becomes clear. Family Guy is deconstructionist. It dismantles the joke, laughs at itself, subverts narrative expectations. It's brilliant in its own way. But American Dad has something Family Guy rarely has: real emotional stakes and characters that matter beyond the gag. On Reddit threads and YouTube comments on Twitter, this conversation comes up with surprising frequency. Adult animation fans going back to American Dad years later and realizing the show aged in a way that Family Guy simply didn't, that the social critique still hit, that Stan Smith feels more relevant today than he did in 2005, and that makes sense, because the brand of conservatism Stan represents didn't disappear, it just got louder. The political paranoia the show satirized as comic exaggeration became part of the mainstream discourse. The performative patriotism that looked like caricature became institutionalized. The distrust of anything different, foreign, or questioning, which the show treated as the quirk of one specific man, gained scale and found its own name. When you rewatch American Dad through today's eyes, the show looks less like satire and more like an early documentary. And that's simultaneously impressive and unsettling. But the show never loses its tone. It never turns into a lecture. It never stops the episode to say, see, conservatism is bad. It trusts its audience. It shows Stan being Stan Stan lets the consequences play out and gives you room to draw your own conclusions. That's the difference between satire and propaganda. Satire respects the intelligence of the person watching. And American Dad at its best does exactly that. There's a scene that perfectly captures what the show does. Stan is fired up, defending some American value with all the conviction in the world. Flag, God, freedom, and then something completely ridiculous happens that demolishes his argument without anyone needing to say a word. The show doesn't need a character to point the finger and say you're wrong. The absurdity does that work on its own. And it's in that space between the laugh and the recognition where American Dad lives. It's humor that makes you laugh first and think second, sometimes much later. In the end, what American Dad is really doing episode after episode is asking one question: how much of what you believe is actually yours, and how much did you inherit without ever questioning it? Stan never asks himself that, and that's exactly why he stays stuck. Keeps repeating the same mistakes. Keeps being the same caricature. Beloved, funny, and underneath it all, pretty tragic. Maybe the smartest satire isn't the kind that convinces the other side. Maybe it's the kind that makes you laugh at the contradiction without even realizing you just recognize yourself in it. If that's true, American Dad might be one of the most honest things American television has ever produced about itself. And the fact that most people still think it's just a dumb cartoon about a CIA agent with an alien in the house, well, that might be the show's greatest punchline of all.